Welcome to The Art of Growth. This is Jim Zartman, and today Joel and I are continuing with our panel series on being a student of your story with our Type 5 panel. Before we get started, this is the last week to sign up for the group coaching series that starts in March. So to join a group, go to theartofgrowth.org and look under the coaching section for group coaching. That's also the place to reach out to us if you'd like to explore individual coaching or training and consulting for your organization. So through this series, we've been having people call in and leave messages about if they could go back to one moment in time, what moment would it be and why? And we don't normally do this, but I wanted to put a trigger warning at the beginning of this episode because if you've experienced some spiritual abuse in a church or something similar, one of our stories was deeply upsetting to us, and you can hear that in the angry response that we have to this moment. But we do think these stories are important to share and important to hear because that is part of the healing process. But I want to thank our fives who called in because as a type that really values their energy and being aware of how much they're giving away, coupled with a desire for privacy, we feel really honored that these fives were willing to call in and leave their story for us to respond to, really for your all benefit. So it's great to have you here, and we're going to go ahead and jump in with this week's episode with our first caller.
Hey there, I am a 1-to-1 5. If I could go back to any time in my life, I'd go back to freshman year of high school. I started dating a guy that I shared more of my internal world with than I had shared with anyone. Hadn't really known or thought to entrust my internal world to others. I mean, I didn't share all things with him, but shared more than I had. If I could go back and change something, I would just not date an adolescent boy. Not quite the safe place to entrust oneself. If I could go back but not change something, then I would go back and just observe and notice what I thought I was after, what it felt like to move through the gap from my internal world out to another person. I guess I would just observe and look back at that younger me. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Leah. That is a constant, I think, for most fives as they describe their connections to other people where there is a trust, a kind of process of building trust that if I share this information with you, what are you going to do with it? You know, and at some level, you have to risk. And that risk is out of your hands at that moment. You know, you can't anticipate. You can't overthink that one. Like, I'm definitely going to be more protective and, you know, surely even less now because you didn't know. And of course, now you look back and you're like, that was an adolescent boy I shared that information with. Yeah, absolutely. And that is, most people do not understand how it impacts a type 5 when they share information that seems to them like, you know, maybe not that private, not that important. In other cases, it's just some very unhealthy adolescent boys who are just sharing whatever it is that they want to share for the sake of some entertainment and fun. But that is always the struggle, I think, for fives is how much information do I share? If I share it, what will you do with it? Do I trust you to maintain the information I've given you, to keep it and not to, you know, broadcast it? And that is the risk that it sounds like you took at a young age where you didn't know. And then you mentioned observing, and I love that part, like observing myself, right? It was more of an observing of yourself, it sounded like, than even observing.
Yeah, if I couldn't change
others.
it, I would want to watch it again and learn something more from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if I can learn, then I will be more prepared next time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Leah. And there was part of it where I went, okay, so she mentioned being a 1-to-1, or what we refer to as like the sexual 5. So you both hear that it has to do with another person in relationship.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear the the one-to-one or the sexual instinct there. But then you hear so much of that 5 in that description. One, she mentioned, I shared more of my internal world. So that is such the treasure for the 5, is that internal world is what I shared. But then you also hear that head type, the fear mechanism and that desire for safety and security, when she said it wasn't a safe place to entrust myself. Of course, like an adolescent boy isn't like a place you're going to entrust yourself. But, that's something that everyone has to have the experience of being young and trying to figure out who can I trust? Who can I be in relationship with? Where are trustworthy sources? And I'm guessing at the time you felt good about sharing, or at least you felt the need to experiment and to do an experiment on, can I entrust myself to this other person? But I just appreciated, you bringing up the safety that to a 5, entrusting yourself to someone feels like a possible compromise to your safety, to the security of your inner world. And I love very much that it was like very straight up the middle of a 5. Like if I couldn't change it, I'd want to study it. I would want to see what I was after. I'd want to understand better what was going through my mind and why I thought that this was a decision to make. And that just makes a ton of sense as far as that 5 mechanism, that I'd want to kind of put the experience in the lab and see what I could learn from it, to observe myself and like what were my needs in that space? Why did I feel like that was a good idea at the time? But also that, questioning of yourself now. So I would have so many follow-up questions if I was like coaching this person, just like, what does risk mean to you now as a sexual subtype? What does like relationship look like to you now, as far as like, who do you entrust yourself to? And how is that different now? What have you learned from that? And I would have so many questions around that, because at a certain point, you do still have to entrust yourself to someone and take those risks.
Yeah, as a fellow head type, the anticipation is the thing that gets to us. Like, I wish I had known, or I should have known, or if I learn, then I will know in the future. So it's always about anticipating what's coming around the corner and being prepared for that. And that's one of the strengths. That's one of the gifts. It works till it doesn't, because relationships are not something you can always anticipate. You can't always know. And so there's a part at which you have to jump off the diving board. You've thought long enough about it. You've looked at it. You've analyzed it. And now you got to go. And so you can't shame yourself for that. It just is what it is. So the places we feel the greatest shame is, I shared this, and in reflection, I can see that it was because I had a hope of a certain outcome that was not even articulated, or maybe even at the conscious level. So I share this in hopes of something in return relationally. And not only did it not come back to me, but then maybe that was shared with other people, and maybe that was mistreated or mishandled. And so now as a 5, I feel tremendous, disappointment, shame.
It wasn't an investment. It was a cost.
It cost me so much.
Yeah.
And so then you learn to separate out a little bit in your own mind, at least. These are my needs. This is what I'm hoping comes out of this relationship.
Yeah.
Right? And that may not happen, but I still need to take a risk to engage in a relationship.
Yeah.
And I don't always control the outcome of that. And so then vulnerability becomes, it's a smarter approach you take now when you're being vulnerable, but you're still being vulnerable because you're choosing that's good for you. Like, the path of vulnerability is something that benefits you as a person in your own growth, even if the outcome isn't that there's a return in vulnerability or a return in kind. But you become smarter about it. Like, oh, that person can't handle that, or that one's gonna hurt more, so I don't want to do that. But again, I really honor the 5s that take these steps. And you took a step. Yes, it was. You learned a lot since then. But keep taking steps towards that. I think that still is the path. Yeah.
Okay, let's hear from our next caller.
Hi, my name is Danielle, and I am an Enneagram Type 5. There's only one time in my life that I would go back to if I could. 20 years ago, my husband and I found out we were pregnant. Then he was my fiance. We had a wedding date and invitation sent out. And for 3 years, our relationship had been turbulent as his family didn't exactly approve of me, which led to an on-again, off-again pattern between us. As I took the pregnancy test, I decided that if he had the slightest negative reaction, I would pack my things and leave town. I was hysterically crying, stressed, and full of anxiety, but he was calm, collected, and steady, wrapped his arms around me and assured me everything was going to be fine. Within 48 hours of our positive pregnancy test, the church staff had collaborated and convinced us the only right thing to do was to get married immediately. We couldn't use the sanctuary, and Tyson couldn't continue to play the drums if we didn't do what they were asking. So we retrieved our marriage license, which wouldn't even be legal, for 3 days, but still exchanged our vows in the living room of the parsonage in front of our mentors and another set of pastors from our church. I was wearing sweatpants, a t-shirt, and my hair thrown in a messy bun. I had a washcloth on my face and a trash bin next to my chair. I had morning sickness all day for my whole first trimester, but that day, my body was exhibiting a severe trauma response. Only back then, I didn't have the knowledge or language to assign this kind of experience. After we and our witnesses signed the license, Tyson left me to explain everything to his parents. He packed his belongings from his room, picked me up, and drove us to his house, which was half renovated. We slept on his twin mattress laid flat on the subfloor of our bedroom. We had no kitchen, no furniture, and no idea what we were doing. Within 5 weeks, we were coerced into making a video confession of our fornication and pregnancy that would be played at our wedding. We were told that it would show accountability and prove our commitment to Christ, the church, and our family. Many of our guests left that sanctuary angry, and we spent the day fielding questions, judgments, demands, and shame. I couldn't eat. My zipper had broken because my little baby bump had popped out. I was embarrassed, overwhelmed, and miserable. Neither one of the days we exchanged vows to each other were ever actually about us. They were about perception, acceptance, belonging, fear, shame, judgment, and consequences. Not a single ounce of it was redemptive, loving, or empathetic. The entire ordeal had stripped me of my voice, dignity, integrity, and self-worth. No one seemed to notice or care what was happening to me emotionally or psychologically. No one seemed to have stood up for us, advocated for us in a loving, supportive, healthy way. And worst of all, I didn't acknowledge what was happening to me. I pretended, suppressed, and internalized it all in order to be acceptable and lovable. I ignored my own intuition, and I didn't stand up for or advocate for my own self. I passively went along with everyone else's ideas and expectations. I robbed myself of autonomy, agency, freedom, safety, and peace. I could have saved her years of healing work and perhaps changed the outcome of some relationships if I could go back and offer that young woman the love, support, safety, and advocacy she deserved and so badly needed. She definitely wouldn't look back at her wedding days and cringe, but maybe exhale with a smile, because instead it would be a night to remember.
Oh, man.
Our response to this is going to require the expletives mark to be added to this podcast, I think.
Yeah, I am so pissed.
Yep.
Like, that is so okay. These many of these churches, so I'm quite familiar with this world. Many of these churches, it's like, one of the statements that you hear constantly is, people aren't calling sin what sin is. People aren't saying what wrong and right are anymore. Well, you know what? This is as plain as it can be said. That is wrong. There is no world in which that response to something like that is correct.
Yeah.
And the harm that causes, the evil that really is. I'm besides myself frustrated and angry at that.
Yeah.
That I hear stories like this all the time, and it's just, I never get used to it. It never comes to a point where I can just look away and say, oh, it doesn't bother me anymore. It makes me mad. And I also carry some of the shame around having, done some of those things, been part of that world where I did some of those things. I was part of it, at least, where I saw things that were wrong, that were done to people like this. So, yeah, I am so sorry, Danielle, that this was done in the name of Jesus, in the name of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that is not in any way
a symbol that's supposed to embody like love and forgiveness. Yeah. And you very precisely chose your words, and I appreciate that. Yeah. But it was like judgment and anger, and I had to prove this, and this was all about perception, and it wasn't about you. Like that's what's so and honestly, like I think you can hear in our voices, like we have our own experiences that we are neutral to stuff like this.
I'm still very much in reaction to a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Like we both carry our own church abuse baggage, and the anger of it comes out in these moments because we're like, that's so abusive. It's so wrong. And like we wish you could show, grace to yourself in that moment as well. But you really took us into the story. You really made it visual for us so that we could really experience what you were experiencing. And so I really appreciate that. But this kind of moment, it is hard to move beyond my own anger. Mm-hmm. Obviously, she's been dealing with this story for a long time. And even though it's still very painful for her, like hearing it for the first time, it just makes me, furious that kind of abuse goes on. To coerce you is the word you use, so I'm going to use it. To coerce you into making a video confessional that played at the wedding.
That is unbelievable.
The visceral sensation that goes through my body when I say that, when I think of that, is just so much anger. Because this thing that is intended to be the celebration of a union, the celebration of, it should have been a celebration of the new life in you, the celebration of your relationship, and then to be put in a situation where, people who weren't part of your tradition, friends who were there, like that was the experience that they had of this tradition that is supposed to be about love and grace and forgiveness and all these words that were the window dressing behind what you experienced and the pain that you were put in that situation. And
I'm not, and I'm not even sure there was any forgiveness. Like, what was wrong? Like,
right.
To me, I look at that and I go, hey, you two, you were in love. So, I mean, I don't understand any longer. I was part of that world. And I don't understand that in any way that is healthy, that is normal. I don't even understand it as theological or in the spirit of Christianity or the faith. There's nothing about that resembles that. And so, I'm deeply, like, I'm with you in that space, Danielle. And I've been part, again, of these and leadership of these systems that were harsh sometimes to people like that. So I carry a lot of that. But I appreciate you taking I can tell you put a lot of time and thought in work in putting this together. And I think that's such a gift to the world. I love how you said I would, in some sense, support. I don't know the words you use, but you would go back to that young woman and support her and be with her and give her the sort of permission, to not take all of that. Like, you didn't need that. That is, of course, at that stage, you were part of the system. The system is part of you. So you sometimes don't know, but now you do. And you're able to still speak to that little girl inside you and say, I got you. And I'm so sorry this was done to you. Yeah.
And at some point, we may need to do some episodes on some of the purity culture that a lot of people experienced in the spiritual abuse topic, but I want to zoom out and focus on your starting point and your ending point, because there was something beautiful in there. Because you said at the beginning, when you took the pregnancy test, and if your fiance did not respond well, that you would have packed your bags and been out of there. But you said he was totally calm. And I heard that phrase before I had the context of the setting that you were in, where, it's perfectly rational for you to think, I don't know how he's going to respond to this, because if he kind of towed the party line, then he would have had a very different reaction. but you said that he responded with calm. So that he was trying to be supportive. So you guys were in a system trying to respond as best you could in the system you were, but that there was still love and acceptance and a calm response in the middle of that to you.
Yeah.
And so that was really encouraging. And then to put his reaction in the context, but both of your reactions in the context of where you were and the kind of subculture that you were having to deal with there is admirable. And from what sounds like is that you got out of that, situation, that you're not a perpetuator now of that system on other people. So if you would have bought it hook, line, and sinker, there are situations where people are raised in an environment and now they're passing that very abuse on to other people. And that it sounds like you've pulled yourself away from that, because what you would have given yourself, you said, the advocacy you deserved. And I love that you use that phrase, because that is what you deserved in that moment was advocacy. And instead you were given shame. And so to zoom out from now, and you are giving yourself now the advocacy that you deserved then, by speaking up, by telling your story, even by sharing your story here. And I think there will be other people that listen to this who have been through similar experiences, who grew up in the 90s, especially the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, like purity culture of Christianity and the sort of oppressive nature of it. I hope that people now can stand in their own advocacy for themselves and others in that.
Yeah. And, we honor how exposing that would have been to you as a 5.
Oh, God.
It's painful for any type. But as a 5, particularly, having all of that exposed and having no place to retreat to, and maybe you did, but it didn't sound like there was a whole lot of place and space for you to retreat to, being, with yourself. I love that, used some specific words like autonomy and agency, and so I appreciate that. And again, I want to, big, huge highlight and underscoring what Jim said, that your sharing this is undoubtedly helpful to countless of people out there who are listening to this, who have had their experiences as well. And so thank you for sharing your heart. Thank you for opening that way. And I don't have any direction or guidance to give you other than to say, my heart is with you in this space. My heart is with you. And I think for a lot of folks in the audience who are listening to this, they would say the same thing. And I want to say that for them as well. Like, our hearts are with you.
Yeah. And well done.
Yeah.
Well done. Hey, I wanted to pause in the middle of this episode to make sure you are aware of the group coaching opportunities that are coming up to learn with one of us over 3 months in a smaller group setting that is designed to help move you forward, especially if you feel stuck. An experience like this will get you unstuck and get you moving in the right direction. When you put that energy in, it comes back. But we also wanted to mention on the podcast today something we don't mention, I think, enough, and that is that we do this training in companies. We've even worked with some Fortune 100 companies in helping their teams communicate more clearly and understand and have more empathy for the people they work with. And teams have found this so beneficial that we want to be able to help more teams get this. Because according to the data in Psychology Today, when companies implemented an emotional intelligence-based program, productivity rose an average of 40%. And we don't just believe the Enneagram is for personal growth, but it is also for professional growth. And we want to help teams and companies thrive in that space. So you can reach out to us at theartofgrowth.org to find out more. Okay, let's continue this week's episode with our next caller.
Hi, my name is Karen, and I'm a type 5. And the moment I would really like to go back to is the moment that I was in the middle of a national race in the 1650 freestyle swimming. I was at the Texas Swim Center, and it was a race I had trained for 7 years. It took me to qualify to be there. And in the middle of the race, there was a woman to my right, and she was matching me stroke for stroke, pace for pace. We were head to head. And I just remember being overwhelmed with fear. The intensity of that moment was just too much for me. I felt angry, I felt frustrated, and I felt absolutely panicked that I wasn't going to make my time. But I also knew that her strategy was that she was using me to pace her, and then she was going to blow me away at the end. And I didn't think I would have it at the end to go head to head with her. So I stopped and rested at the wall and let her take a few seconds to blow ahead of me so that I could swim in my own space. So I would love to go back to that moment because I think it really exemplifies a lot of what is challenging for me when the emotion, the culmination of anticipation, right? I've been in my head about it for so many years, right? Working really hard towards this goal. And the culmination of that just felt super scary. And I really went into that fear space of not being able to meet up. So that intensity and that mastery component, both were something that I really struggled with. And I struggle with in a lot of areas. And I see that thread in different places in my life.
Hey, Karen, thank you so much for that story. It's not often that we hear about competition. And I love that because as a type 7, so head type, in the space of competition and how much I end up in my head, that makes a lot of sense. You will do it differently, of course, than I will. But it was very vivid for me how you explained that. I could feel it. I could be there with you in that moment. And it shows up, I think for a lot of people. You know, Jim, you just had mentioned to me, like, that's why we have sports psychologists. Yeah. Because it does play a factor in all of our, of our lives. I wonder for you if it's the same thing as it is for me now, where I'm looking at not just my sport that I play separate from life, but the integration of it and how often I end up in my head and where that can take me, off of the game of life, like overthinking this. So for me, this is like a discipline, the sport that I'm in now, where I am practicing the discipline of not getting too much into my head. Yeah. And how it affects me at an emotional level. So it's really interesting how that is like a loop that I'm observing. And it happened to me today where the player I was playing against, who is better than I am, in a body type, got to the point where he stopped after 2 games and he looked at me and he said, "You know what you're doing?" And I did not want to really hear it. I did and I didn't, because I was already mad at myself. And then hearing him say, "You are not thinking smart about your plays," which is a shot against me because that is what I tend to do, is try to think smart about this shot. And I said, "Well, I am trying to think." And he said, "You're not relaxing. That's your problem." And oh my gosh, yeah. I was like, that is the same lesson over and over again. And the choice I had in that moment was, are you going to get back into your body, or are you going to get even angrier at the fact that you're not competing at the level you should be competing at, and then get into your head again? So I'm thinking about your story, and I'm wondering about all of those things. Like, what are you learning from that in terms of its integration into your life? But I totally resonate with you, my friend, as a head type, that is a challenge for us head types, where we lose our way because we get so anticipatory,
Yeah, there's something about competitive sports that are this little microcosm of the bigger picture of life,
isn't it? Yeah.
And so it really sticks out to us. And I think we're trying to learn lessons in that setting that we're trying to apply to a larger swath of life. But in Karen's story, like, man, the 7 years of preparation to do this is like, wow, oh my goodness. And then, so there's such a high investment.
Yeah.
We talk about the 5 being the observer. So even while she's racing, she's observing the person next to her, and she's noticing that this person is matching her stroke for stroke. And so then that's what actually gets her out of the body mechanism and into that head space of observation, and then discovering this person's strategy. So she's noticing this person's strategy and observing what this person is doing, and then anticipation, because she mentioned anticipating and being in her head about what was going to happen. And so just the intensity and the pressure of that moment, to where she didn't say this, but what it sounded like she regretted was the backing off. So like staying at the wall for a second and then letting this person pull ahead of her so she could swim in her own space. Like, I need my own space as a 5. I don't want to like have this all around me. But at the same time, saying like I didn't do what I knew I could do in that space.
Well, someone got into my head.
Someone got into my head.
So that space thing is like, oh, you're in my
space.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I want to separate myself from you. But sometimes that comes at that cost.
Yeah.
That is so frustrating. And so many of us, like, we are frustrated that we took our foot off the gas, that we backed off.
We thought somebody else was better. Like, this swimmer next to me is going to match me, and then they're going to blow me away. And maybe that's not the case. But we tend to think, and I wonder how many others you will get into that space where your opposition is equal, and you think to yourself, they're better. They're gonna just blow me away. They're smarter. They're more athletic. They're more whatever. And we compare ourselves.
Right.
And then, that plays a role into our thinking as well.
Yeah.
Throws us off our game.
Yep. Yeah. And I was sharing, I was just in a similar kind of situation a couple weeks ago. But it made me think of Rickson Gracie, who's one of the greatest mixed martial arts fighter of all time. And he said that it was early on, he was like in his fighting career, where he realized he was having to face the opponent in front of him and face the opponent within his own head.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I decided at a certain point that I was only going to face one opponent at a time, and it needed to be them. So he said, I had to deal with the opponent within my own head, questioning myself. He's like, so that I could focus all of my energy on only one opponent.
Yeah.
And there was something about that I thought was really beautiful, because, how many times in so many different areas of our lives do we defeat ourselves more than we're defeated by someone else?
Before we're defeated by the opponent.
Yeah.
That's very true.
It's such a thing that we battle with. And so much of what we do is we want to be like welcoming and opening other people in love. But there's these settings where there is an element of an opponent, even if that opponent is the goal that you have to push through. And we need goals in our lives. Gives us that sense of meaning and accomplishment.
Or the resistances in our lives. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We need resistances.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is what builds us stronger in every single way. And there's lots of data that shows why we need some kind of resistance training in our life, something that allows us to deal with the struggle. Otherwise we do. But I felt this one pretty deeply, just because I've been there. I've been in that situation where it's just like I listened to that voice, or I got in my own head, or I did this thing.
Yeah.
And if I could have blocked all of that out.
Yeah.
But it's like, what's the takeaway? Because I haven't solved this yet. In my own experience, that's one of the hardest enemies to defeat, is that mechanism within your own head that gets in the way of what you would be capable of if you weren't battling that opponent as well.
Yeah. One of the speculations I have is that it is easier to be beaten by your internal opponent than it is to actually be beaten by an external opponent. I think in some sense it's the self-defeating is self-serving, because it's less painful than to discover maybe that, your inadequacies. But the surprise about that is that oftentimes you also miss out on your capacities as well. Like because you're self-defeated, you didn't realize you were more capable than you currently are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John Danaher, he's the greatest current jiu-jitsu coach in the world. And he says, for every one match that is lost because of overconfidence, 100 are lost due to timidity.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. For every one that is lost
Wow.
overconfidence, 100 are lost due to timidity.
Boy, that
And
is good.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. So in my game, people wouldn't think that, like, unless you know me and are better players, like the better players see it.
Yeah.
But because I'm all out, like I don't slink back. I mean, sometimes I do. Sometimes I get in like depressed and I'm like, forget it. And I quit the game.
Right.
Most of the time I don't. Most of the time I attack.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay,
It looks
now that
aggressive.
so it looks aggressive, but it's actually much more of that very thing of timidity or lack of confidence.
Yeah.
Because the confidence now is like it's an over amping on the attack.
Yeah.
And the more settled confidence is a smart confidence. It's like, well, this is the better shot to take and I can do it and I can make it. Or, in the swimming thing, it's, oh yeah, okay, but I'm going to play my game.
Yeah.
And I know my game and I'm just going to continue on that. Yeah, that's a really, really insightful saying. So, yeah, thank you so much, Karen. That's just, I'm with you, and thank you for sharing that. I would love to hear from some of these who have called in, like future notes of, here's what I've learned, or here's what I'm practicing, or
what happened after.
Yeah.
I know we're getting part of the story. Thank you, Karen, for sharing that, because I think there's really good stuff in it. Even if it isn't like a solution, we can be a part of that dialogue. And if you have any solutions, Karen, if you learned from that, call us back and let us know that. So that's good stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's hear from our next caller.
Hello, my name is Corin, and I am an Enneagram type 5. This is a challenging question, especially as a pass-oriented type. Not because I have a million moments I would want to go back and do differently, as though I'm stuck in the past, clinging to longing or regret. For me, that's actually not what it means to be oriented to the past. I heard it said once that pass-oriented types are tethered to the past. It's as though I have a constant connection to the moments of my life. I'm able to revisit them, bringing along new insights and curiosities. There's always something else to learn or a new way to look at a memory. So when you ask which one I would go back to, I say they are already with me all of the time. One moment I keep particularly close has offered tremendous insight, especially when considered through the lens of the 5. At the age of 5, I was walking to my very first day of school. As I came up to the steps of the school, I felt my chest expand with pride. I walked as though I was 6 feet tall. While I know it is very unlikely that I was truly by myself, it was my first day of kindergarten after all. In my memory, I was entirely alone, and I was swimming in confidence. I don't know where that energy got lost along the way. Maybe lost isn't even the right word, because I know it's in there, but it has most definitely been contained. Somewhere the overwhelm of the world around me shrunk that confidence. I honestly can't remember the last time I walked into any place with such pride. I keep myself tethered to that memory not only because I see it as a perfect exemplar of the 8-soul child within me, but because when I relive that moment, I can feel it in every part of my body. There is an embodied life force emanating out of this tiny little 5-year-old. The juxtaposition of that imagery is as entertaining as it is endearing. Most days I feel so far from that little girl. While that boldness still finds a way out, it always begins safely on the sidelines, observing first. But little Corin didn't need to observe anything before walking through those doors. She didn't care that she didn't know what to expect. She didn't need anyone else there with her for reassurance or a hand to hold. She had no idea what was to come, and she marched confidently toward life regardless.
Yeah. All right. Very interesting that you have a memory of the time before that moment of, the loss of the, integration of the self. I love that, because I think when we can, it is a wonderful, using your word, juxtaposition against what we are now. But in some ways, it is helpful to us to have a vision of integration. The question that sometimes, and it's something that I think we have to, as head types, go with, which is the why question, right? Head types are very why. Why did this happen? And that's helpful, and it's a good thing to do. but it has its limitations. And for us head types, it's not always obvious to us that there is a limitation to the question why. Because the next thing that you have to go to, once you've done the sort of, okay, I've asked the questions why, and I don't have an answer. You don't always have to have an answer to still experience the reintegration, where the reintegration is something that we can practice, even if we don't fully experience it at the sort of emotional, experiential level. Like the experiential level is you felt it all the way through your body, as you said. Like every part of you felt vibrantly alive and confident walking into school. So how do we get back to that? Well, we ask the question of why did we lose that, right? Why did we fall? Why did we fall out of that? The metaphor I use is why were we exiled from the garden? That sort of thing. But you don't always know why. And sometimes that becomes unhelpful to us. And you have to move into okay, but what do I do now about it? So the what over the why. What do I do now? Can I reintegrate that? Can I behave as if I'm confident? Can I behave in the sense of moving forward in the body and then see what happens as a result of that? And almost always it counteracts against the fear that tells us that something bad is going to happen if we do that. And it doesn't. We move forward and something good happens. So I think that comes up for me as I'm listening to your story, Corin.
The phrase that stuck out to me the most was how she said little Corin didn't need to observe first.
Yeah, before going in.
Before engaging.
Yeah.
It was like there was a confidence leaning into that body and kind of confirmed something I've always wondered about. Like, do we know what we need to know, and are we who we need to be like at 5 years old, and then we lose it through life experience shortly after that, and then we spend the rest of our lives trying to get back to that? And it's like this moment that she remembers and going, and also that's not every kindergarten story. Like I remember it was only a few years ago, my daughter was going into kindergarten for the first time and watching all these kids, and they're all kind of looking at each other, trying to figure out like, where do I fit in? Like, what am I doing? There is a bit of that observation, but there are kids that's just kind of like, yeah, here we go. Like, this is great. I'm super excited about this experience. I'm excited about my life, which is awesome. But it's interesting because I would not have imagined a 5 saying that kind of thing. So I feel like I'm trying to understand even what she means by that. I feel like I have more questions than I do answers on that about this. Little Corin didn't need to observe first. Mm-hmm. So you didn't always feel this way. Mm-hmm. Do you remember when you started feeling this way? Have you had any other experiences where you felt that you were able to just walk through the door and be in that sort of body confidence energy of just feeling like, yeah, I got this. Let's go. I'm going to be in my element. And maybe it's because like I'm going into a school environment and I know I'm going to be smart and be able to figure things out.
Sure, that might have been an environment more natural.
Yeah.
Definitely was not my experience going to school. It was a terrifying experience.
Not mine either.
Yeah.
But I was just kind of wondering, how is all the kids going to get along? I think that, how are we all going to fit together and all that stuff? I think I've always sort of wondered about that. But that's just a fascinating little phrase that sticks out to me and go, well, what was that? Where did it feel like that went awry? Like by the end of the day, did it go awry, or did it take some time to
series of experiences?
What kind of experiences do you remember that?
C.S. Lewis, developed this idea of you have your naivete and then you lose it, right? And then you can come back to it, but when you come back to it, it's at a different level. It's deeply wise. Mm. Whereas the first one is not. It's just naive without wisdom.
Yeah.
And I think that it is part of the path. Like you have to lose it, right? So you have to have the space of innocence. Yeah. Then you have to lose that. And then your growth, if you keep moving forward, is you reintegrate some of that part of your first experiences of life, but with wisdom and with depth. So some of the things that you discover is, as a 5, I didn't need to observe or think what was coming about next. Yeah, but some of the skills you've learned and some of the gifts that emerge from the 5 is the capacity to really frame at a large level, to synthesize things, to frame things, to have strong and really, really helpful perspective, the capacity to even anticipate and with a good measure of accuracy what is coming around the corner. I mean, these are things that you do learn. But now can it shift from being driven by fear to something that is driven by a gift, driven by joy, driven by confidence, And that is the shift that we start to make as we continue to grow. And so you return to that place of, can I engage some things in life without having to overthink? Yes, absolutely. But in some other cases, it does need some thought. And that is my gift to the world as well. So that is part of the growth path, but I appreciate not always knowing where it fell apart, because sometimes we just don't know.
Right.
Maybe an event, a single event, maybe a series of events.
But knowing that that's within you to lean into that.
Yeah, it is within you.
And she mentioned, that line to her 8 space of being able to have that confidence and to know that, the 8 is within you, and that you can lean into that. And it is finding your path to that, which has all that confidence in it. You're still going to take your 5 with you. You're still going to have that intellect, and you're still going to have that capacity to observe, but you're going to actually move it into action, and it's going to be good.
But I think for all types, there's a sense at which I'll be ready when I'm ready, and you never are ready. It's like, because the loops that we have are intended to give us the sense of confidence to then move forward in life, and the loops almost never do.
Right.
So at some point you have to go, I'm not ready to move forward. I don't feel confident in moving forward.
Right.
But I think I've done enough thinking, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get there anymore through more thinking. So now I have to move back into action, and it's going to feel very unsatisfying.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said that on the Enneagram feelings wheel, that the central for the head types is a faith, the capacity to move forward even when you do not know the outcome.
Yeah.
And that's so much of what it has to be, is like, you're not going to know the outcome. You can't solve it. You're not going to have the answer always first, but that doesn't mean you can't proceed. Yeah. And when you see really high self-mastery head types, is they are bringing their gifts with them, but they're still moving. They're not hanging back trying to solve it all before engaging. Like they take that with them as they engage. And I think it's a good reminder that Corin gives everyone that is within you. Yeah. It's there. It's there. Present within you, and you can do that. And we have to sometimes remember the forgotten self that has the confidence to proceed, even if we do not know, I'm using the word know there, the outcome.
Yeah.
But we can still trust that moving forward is worth it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening today. If you are new to all this, you can go to theartofgrowth.org and take a free Enneagram test, a free instincts test, and start to build a real snapshot that will lead to better self-awareness and the transformation that can follow as you grow in self-awareness in this way. If you have any more questions, you can reach out to us at theartofgrowth.org, and make sure you're there signed up for our newsletter so you can keep up with everything that's going on here. You can also follow us on Instagram at just Art of Growth. And we do have some new series that I think will work on there that won't quite work on the podcast. So there'll be some good stuff there. Okie dokie. May you, my friends, give yourself permission to withdraw from a story in order to gain the perspective of the story. May you lean into the gift of the 5 to observe and evaluate from a place of clarity and calm. And in that space, discover the foundational truth and the deeper wisdom. Grace and growth, my friends.